Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ryan Hall. I am the Director of Marketing for Lighthouse AI, a pharma solutions company. We welcome you to today's webinar, How Reportable Changes Can Put You in Non-Compliance with State Licensing in 30 Days. Before we dive into the main content, we'd like to provide you with some additional information to ensure that you have a smooth and enjoyable webinar experience. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand at a later date. By default, all attendees' audio and video are muted to minimize background noise and distractions. The chat function will also be disabled for today's webinar. However, you can submit your questions at any time via the Q&A feature, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom window. Our team will address your questions during the designated Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. Also, we'll introduce multiple poll questions today for two reasons: as part of our ongoing market research and for audience engagement. And don't worry, all individuals' answers remain anonymous. Now, let's take a quick look at our agenda. We'll start with some clarifications on the terminology we'll be using today. We'll discuss what's at stake if you don't comply with change requirements. We'll discuss how to determine your change requirements, problems determining those change requirements, and solutions to those problems. Now, if this is your first time joining a Lighthouse AI webinar, let me just give a brief introduction of our company. Lighthouse AI provides state licensing software and services to companies within the pharmaceutical supply chain to help meet requirements set by regulatory agencies. The company was born out of Pharma Solutions, a consulting and services company started in 2015 by our CEO and founder, Samit Singh. We have been engaged by over 700 clients, spanning pharmaceutical and device manufacturers, wholesale distributors, 3PLs, pharmacies, and more. Now to introduce today's speakers, we have Michelle Ann Jimenez Fletcher, who will be presenting today. Michelle is the Director of Regulatory Compliance at Lighthouse AI. Michelle is also a Juris Doctor graduate from Loyola University, New Orleans College of Law, and has been a state licensing and pharma regulatory research professional for the past 5 years. Also presenting today is Liza Collins. Liza is a Senior Research Associate with Lighthouse AI, bringing over 5 years of experience in pharmaceutical regulatory compliance. She specializes in state licensing research and has a strong background in conducting due diligence reviews. Now, a quick legal disclaimer: Lighthouse AI is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. The information provided is subject to change and is intended for use as informative industry knowledge. Now I'd like to clarify some of the terminology we'll be using during today's webinar. First, we'll use the term state licensing to refer to facility licenses that companies in the pharmaceutical supply chain are required to obtain from regulatory agencies in all 50 US states and additional US jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Specifically, we're referring to licenses such as California's non-resident drug wholesaler license or Arizona's resident manufacturer license. And we'll also use the term state licensing professionals during today's webinar to refer to individuals who work for companies in the pharmaceutical supply chain and are responsible for managing state licensing for their company. So if you manage state licensing for your company, we're referring to you when we say state licensing professionals. And if you don't manage state licensing for your company, then we're referring to the person who does. Finally, we'll use the term reportable changes during today's webinar to refer to organizational changes that create change requirements for your active state licenses. There are over 10 different types of reportable changes that you can make, including but not limited to ownership changes, company name changes, or designated representative changes. When these organizational changes occur, license holders must take action with the regulatory agency. Today, we'll refer to these required actions as change requirements. Change requirements refer to actions such as submitting an amended initial license application, a flash notification, a change application, or a new initial license application. And what reportable changes are not. Just to clarify, they are neither event-driven changes nor facility attribute changes. For example, a business model change, business activity change, or product portfolio change. Those will be covered in a different webinar. And to start things off and get a read for the audience today, we're going to put our first poll question up on the screen. So now that we reviewed what reportable changes are and what change requirements are, let's see if everyone has participated in a change requirement before or gone through one previously. So the poll's up on your screen now. Have you completed a reportable change within the last 2 years? Perfect. Thanks for the participation, everyone. Just going to give it a moment to give everyone a chance to respond, and then we'll take a look at the data. Curious to see how many people have been through a reportable change before. Perfect. Let me go ahead and end that poll and actually share the results with everybody. This is great. It actually looks like most participants today have actually been a part of a change project in the past, whether that's a change of ownership, some kind of change of staff and leadership, or designated representative. So good. Some folks will be familiar with the material we're reviewing today. Thank you so much, everyone. Perfect. So now I'd like to pass things over to Michelle to discuss what's at stake. Michelle?
Thanks, Ryan. We're presenting this webinar today because some companies are unaware of change requirements, and because many companies overlook change requirements for one or more of their licenses when they go through a reportable change, and because many companies fall behind the deadlines for complying with change requirements. Companies are non-compliant with agency requirements when they do not comply with change requirements or do not comply with change requirements on time. Non-compliance can result in fines, loss of revenue, or even license revocation. There can be serious consequences of non-compliance with change requirements. The magnitude of the consequences depends on the change requirement itself. Some change requirements have greater consequences than others. A change of ownership, or CHOW, has the greatest consequences, things like disciplinary action and fines. Failure to report a change of ownership can result in a license lapsing, as the license does not transfer to new ownership in some states, and the new entity needs to apply for a new license. For such a violation, a company may be disciplined with a fine exceeding $25,000. Another is legal fees. Legal fees are also common because typically companies will want to have local representation in front of the boards. For example, I am familiar with a DME supplier who earlier this year was disciplined for not filing a CHOW after submitting new business registration paperwork in support of their renewal in Missouri. Separate and in addition to the fine of $5,000, legal fees were in excess of $5,000 for preparation, representation, and finalizing a settlement. Lastly, loss of sales revenue. After a change of ownership, failure to submit a new license application by the time of the deadline will result in a lapse of licensure, as the licensing agency will almost immediately inactivate the license. After having their license inactivated, those companies' customers are very likely to stop purchasing or accepting product from the facility, especially with the additional federally mandated scrutiny of authorized trading partners via the DSCSA. And of course, in a worst case scenario, those that continue to sell and ship into the state may receive a cease and desist demand from state regulators. In one real world example, a Texas based company acquired another company based in Florida, but failed to properly apply for and be awarded with a new license after a change of ownership, resulting in a lapse in licensure. With an inactivated license, it took 6 weeks for the Florida DBPR to process and issue a new license to the company from the time that the company first learned of its noncompliance. The acquiring company was not able to sell or distribute products in that state for over 4 weeks, which was devastating from a customer satisfaction and PR perspective. A change in DR, a designated representative, can also have serious consequences, again, such as fines. In a real world example, I've seen the California board discover a change of DR during a renewal process for a New Jersey based company, and they were subsequently issued a $2,000 fine and disciplinary action. Also, lost sales revenue. Thankfully, that company did have a licensed DR because in California, If a new DR is not licensed, California may revoke a license, preventing the company from shipping and selling into the state until the DR is licensed. That is in addition to issuing a disciplinary action. If the facility does not have a licensed DR to replace the outgoing DR, the license is suspended and the company cannot do business in the state until the company has a DR in place and has reapplied for a new application for the facility. Some common consequences of noncompliance, something like domino effect and reciprocal discipline. The second order effect is that the company needs to report disciplinary action to some other states in which other licenses are held and most applications submitted in the future. Disciplinary reporting is a reportable event, but not a reportable change covered in this webinar. The domino effect, or reciprocal discipline, is often described as a disciplinary death spiral. That's because disciplinary action is a separate reportable event that can trigger separate disciplinary action in other states. States that are known to issue reciprocal discipline with their own fines include, but are not limited to, states like Alabama, Florida, and Kansas. And failing to report the discipline is not an alternative. For example, when a drug distributor in the state of California did not report their discipline related to a change requirement, they were fined $10,000 and had to file for 3 emergency temporary licenses and hire outside legal counsel, which cost the company a total of $50,000 to remedy over several weeks. In addition, there's application processing delays. Application processing times are also at stake. When you answer yes to the question, has your company ever been disciplined? On future applications, the processing for your application increases because agencies must slow down to properly review the discipline. States like Vermont will automatically issue a preliminary denial. In other words, companies with disciplinary actions are guilty until proven innocent. In a real-world example, a DME supplier that was not properly licensed in a state ended up paying well over $100,000 for a single miss on a license because multiple states followed with disciplinary action. And the company had to both obtain legal representation in all of these states, as well as pay fines in each state. Now, before we explain how to determine your change requirements when a reportable change occurs, we'll stop for another poll question. Ryan?
Great. Thanks, Michelle. All right. So we know that change requirements can carry heavy consequences if not completed accurately and on time. So let's dig into this a little bit with our audience to get some real world data. Again, all answers are anonymous, but curious how many people here on the webinar today have failed to comply with a reportable change requirement for any reason. Did you simply forget to submit the information? Did you not know that the company had a change requirement that you had to submit? Or did you fail to verify the requirement appropriately? Perfect. Seems like we got some responses here. Let's take a look at those results. Appreciate all the participation today. This data is great. All right, so take a look. So it looks like the majority of people have not forgotten or did not know, have not forgotten to apply for a change requirement or submit that change project. So good job, everyone. There are a small group of individuals that forgot to submit. That's very common, so no worries there. But appreciate the information, everybody. And let's go ahead and pass things over to Liza to talk about how to determine change requirements.
Thanks, Ryan. As we mentioned at the start of the webinar, there are over 10 different changes to your business that could trigger change requirements. However, let me briefly cover the 5 most common reportable changes, including 1, change of ownership or corporate structure, 2, change of name, 3, change of officer, 4, change of designated rep or pharmacist in charge, 5, change of physical address. When a reportable change occurs, state licensing professionals must determine their change requirements. To determine your change requirements, state licensing professionals must complete these 3 steps. First, capture the details of the change that will determine your change requirements. Second, compile the list of all the active licenses held by each facility affected by the change. 3, determine whether each license has a change requirement, how to comply, and when to comply. Specifically, a state licensing professional will first attempt to find requirement details on the agency website, meaning applications, FAQs, and guidance documents. For unclear or incomplete requirement details, they'll contact the agency. State licensing professionals must capture the complete and correct details of each reportable change. Some changes are more detailed and nuanced and varied across jurisdictions than others. That's because change requirements depend on the details of the change as well as how the company is licensed or registered across the country. A change of address may only require information on the date of the change and the new address, whereas a change of ownership requires up to 9 unique pieces of data. These include the level of ownership changing, meaning direct licensee, parent company, or grandparent company, whether the Federal Employer Identification Number, FEIN, is changing, whether the entity type is changing, meaning corporation to LLC or vice versa, what percentage of ownership is changing, change in shareholders, whether the entity is publicly traded, whether there is a sale of assets, whether the entity is a subsidiary or a division of another corporation, and lastly, whether the entity is merging into or consolidating with another company. A final point is that state licensing professionals must capture more details for some jurisdictions than others because a change requirement in one jurisdiction may depend on more change details than in another jurisdiction. While the change requirements for a change of ownership depend on many details, the steps of capturing the details of the change is an important step for all reportable changes. When a reportable change occurs, state licensing professionals must determine all change requirements for all their licenses. Consequently, state licensing professionals must ensure they compile a complete list of all licenses held by each affected facility. Why? Because state licensing professionals will overlook change requirements for licenses they forgot about or just don't know about. During a change, state licensing professionals encounter one of 3 scenarios. 1, the state licensing professional can confirm they have a current and complete list of licenses held by each facility. 2, someone else in the company can confirm they have a current and complete list of licenses held by each facility. 3, no one can confirm they have a current and complete list of licenses held by each affected facility. Consequently, the state licensing professional must verify the licenses each facility holds with each agency. The state licensing professional must use each agency's license verification webpage to capture all the licenses each facility holds with each agency. More importantly, state licensing professionals must not overlook any agency. If they do, they overlook all the licenses with that overlooked agency. Also important is a review of as-filed applications because state licensing professionals need to ensure that the information being provided doesn't contradict the information previously provided to that agency. A real-world example is that a wholesaler company had originally named the owner as the DR for their initial states, and then started listing the facility manager as the DR as they scaled the company. When filing for a change of DR, a state agency issued a disciplinary action against the company for failing to disclose the change of DR from the owner to the facility manager. Now I'll hand things over to Michelle to discuss how to assess your change requirement details.
Thanks, Liza. After the state licensing professional confirms they have a complete list of licenses for the facilities affected by the change, they move on to the next step, determining change requirement details for each license by reviewing licensing details on agency websites. You'll look for 3 major change requirement details for each license. 1, whether each license has a change requirement. 2, what to do to comply with the change requirement. And 3, when to comply with the change requirement. I'll explain all 3, starting with the first key detail, whether each license has a change requirement. When you experience a reportable change, not every license in your portfolio will have a change requirement. And that's why your first step is to determine which of your licenses has a change requirement. For all licenses with change requirements, you need to then determine how to comply with the change requirement. Specifically, change requirements are one of 4 actions. A flash notification. This is an email or a letter to the agency notifying the agency of the change. Or it could be an amended initial application, which is a copy of the initial license application with changes to certain sections, meaning those sections that have changed due to the reportable change. A change application, which is an application that may be simple, asking a company only to fill in relevant sections per the change, or may be as extensive as a new application requiring most of the information originally filed. Lastly, a new initial state license application. A change of ownership will almost always require the acquiring company to submit an initial license application for each affected facility. So after you determine whether you need to submit a flash, amend a license application, submit a change application, or submit an initial application, you need to determine when you must comply with the change requirement. Change requirement deadlines vary across agencies and across changes. Deadlines range from 60 days prior to the change to 30 days after the change, with deadlines spreading between those 2 points. For example, many deadlines are within 24 hours of the change. So, to summarize, you'll look for 3 major requirement details for each license. 1, whether each license has a change requirement. 2, how to comply with the change requirement. And 3, when to comply with the change requirement. Next, I'd like to explain where you can find the change requirement details on a regulatory agency's website. Not all agencies provide all change details on their website, but some do. And for those agencies, you'll find change details in one of 3 places on their website. 1, license applications. 2, under their rules and regulations. Or 3, even their frequently asked questions and guidance documents. In just a minute, I'll show you where to look and what to look for in a few examples of these documents. But first, let's take a look at the next details you'll need to search for: how to comply and when. All right, so where to look? To locate change requirements, a state licensing professional would need to navigate each state agency's website for which they hold a license. The first place to look is on the general licensing webpage. We'll start with a straightforward example. For the California Board of Pharmacy, you would navigate to the licenses webpage and then to the facility license information renewal page. And from there, you would search for any mention of change requirements. In this instance, you scroll down to the required notification from licensees section. Here, the link is to the change of ownership and location requirements. When you select the link, the next page has some details. As you can see from the screenshots, the details state the change of ownership requires a new license application and that it must be submitted at least 30 days prior to the changes occurring. Now we'll take a look at another example. In Nebraska, the change requirements are much harder to find. They are located in the Nebraska Administrative Code, which are the state's rules and regulations. Here, you would navigate to Nebraska's Rules and Regulations Division and conduct a keyword search for your business model's license until you found the applicable rule or regulation detailing change requirements. In the example to the right, you can see that this Nebraska regulation requires license holders to submit a notification to the Department of Health and Human Services when any of the listed changes occur. For a change in pharmacist in charge, the license holder must notify the agency within 1 business day of when there is a change in pharmacist in charge. Other changes have other deadlines. A change of ownership or a change of name requires license holders to submit notification within 15 days and within 5 days, respectively. Now, if you can't confirm all 3 major requirement details in those 4 documents, you'll need to contact the agency to confirm those details, meaning you'll need to contact the agency to confirm whether one of your licenses has a change requirement, or how to comply with the change requirement, or when you must comply with the change requirement. Clarify change requirement details by contacting agencies with unclear or incomplete details on their website. State licensing professionals typically send an email or call the agency to confirm 3 major requirement details. A real-world example is that New Mexico regulations suggest that a change of ownership filing is required for a grandparent deal. However, we have multiple emails from the board saying that they will not require one. Sometimes, however, agencies are unwilling or unable to confirm the change requirement details. Now, in this case, the agency will refer to state licensing professionals to their legal counsel or to state law and regulation. So, here's a summary of what I covered in this section. First, we've got to capture the details of the change that will determine your change requirements. Next, we're going to compile a list of all the active licenses held by each facility affected by the change. And then we're going to determine whether each license has a change requirement, how to comply, and when to comply. And attempt to find requirement details on the agency website through applications, FAQs, and guidance documents. And then for unclear or incomplete requirement details, we're going to contact the agency. I'm going to pass things over back to Ryan for another quick poll question.
Thank you, Michelle. Maybe one of the most interesting polls of the day is up on your screen now. What was the worst consequence you faced because you did not comply with a reportable change requirement? There are multiple that people can face, and everyone's perception of this may be a little different. There's license revocation. There's loss of sales revenue. Some people experience very large legal fees to contest the disciplinary action that comes afterwards, or the disciplinary actions and fines that the board or regulatory agency applies directly to you. All right, perfect. We got a lot of answers on this one. This is always one of my favorites. So let's take a look and see what people said. Let's share those results. Interestingly enough, people said the fines or other disciplinary actions were worse than license revocation, loss of sales revenue, which I thought was going to be the biggest, or legal fees. All right, everyone, thank you for submitting those answers. Appreciate all your participation today. Now I'm going to pass things back over to Liza to discuss problems we face in capturing details for change requirements. Liza?
Thanks, Ryan. State licensing professionals face many problems when determining their change requirements. They face problems when capturing change details, compiling a license list, finding as-filed applications, and determining the change requirements for each of those licenses, including how and when to comply with each license. But before we get to those problems, I want to highlight the problem that exasperates all the other problems: the deadlines. State licensing professionals have very little time to determine their change requirements. As we mentioned earlier, change requirement deadlines range from 60 days prior to the change to 30 days after the change. Those are aggressive deadlines. Two factors make these deadlines even worse. One, many state licensing professionals find out about a change late, leaving even less time before the deadline. And two, not only must state licensing professionals determine their change requirements before those deadlines, they must also comply with the change requirements before those deadlines. And that means they have even less time to determine their change requirements. These deadlines leave very little room for error when state licensing professionals attempt to determine all their change requirements across all their licenses for all affected facilities. And when there's very little room for error, this work is error-prone due to many points of failures in the steps we outlined in the previous section of the webinar. I'll explain the problems for each step, starting with problems related to capturing the details internally. For some reportable changes, the details of the change determine whether the change is reportable. For example, a change of ownership smaller than 5% of outstanding stock may not be a reportable change. State licensing professionals don't always know which details of the change will determine their requirements. That's because the details that determine their requirements can differ across all their different licenses for all the different agencies across all the jurisdictions in which they do business, or have products that could end up in those jurisdictions. It's hard to know what details about the change they need to capture when the change occurs. For example, many do not know that they need to ask the following questions in the event of a change of ownership. What percentage of the corporate structure is changing? Is the federal tax ID changing? Is the change at the licensee level, parent level, grandparent level? So instead of capturing the details in one meeting at the start of the process, they reconnect with internal stakeholders every time they find a new detail that determines whether the license has a change requirement or not. This back and forth is frustrating for internal stakeholders, and worse, it slows down the time-constrained work of determining your change requirements. And that's the problem with step one, capturing the details of the change. There are more problems in step two, such as compiling a list of active licenses for each facility affected by the change. As we discussed earlier, state licensing professionals encounter one of three scenarios when attempting to determine their change requirements. Scenario one, the state licensing professional can confirm they have a current and complete list of licenses held by each facility. Scenario two, someone else at the company can confirm they have a current and complete list of licenses held by each facility. Scenario three, no one can confirm they have a complete list of active licenses held by each affected facility. In scenario three, the state licensing professionals must verify the licenses each facility holds with each agency. The problem with this scenario is that there is no single source of truth state licensing professionals can use to verify their list of active licenses across all the agencies. Instead, the state licensing professional must verify their list of active licenses with each agency. And depending on a facility's product portfolio, that can mean verifying licenses on over 100 plus agency websites. There are two problems with this process of verifying active licenses on agency websites. These problems prevent state licensing professionals from completing this work correctly. First, this process takes a long time, and state licensing professionals don't have the time due to the deadlines for the change requirements. Consequently, they rush the work, and like oil and water, rushing and accuracy don't mix. Second, even without the time constraints, the process is error prone. That's because there is no single source of truth that lists every agency with a licensing requirements for a facility. As a result, state licensing professionals can easily forget about one or more agencies when rushing to verify their active licenses. And if they do, they will exclude all their licenses with that agency from the list of licenses they use to determine their change requirements. And to spell it out, they won't comply with the change requirements for the licenses that aren't on their list. The actual process of reviewing the license verification pages is error prone. One distraction on one website causes state licensing professionals to incompletely capture all their licenses with an agency. And when that happens, state licensing professionals exclude that list from the list of licenses they use to determine their change requirements. And to spell it out again, they won't comply with the change requirements for the licenses not on the list. And those are the problems with step two, compiling a list of active licenses for each facility affected by the change. There are many more problems in step three, meaning the work of actually determining whether each license has a change requirement, and if yes, how to comply and when to comply. Now I'll pass it over to Michelle to discuss how requirements vary across the licenses.
Thanks, Liza. Now, the main problem state licensing professionals face when determining their change requirements vary. One, there's a lot of work to be done, and two, there's too little time to do this work. Why? Because the deadlines vary for these change requirements and because all of the time wasters we talked about previously. By now, you understand problem number two, so allow me to focus on problem number one. So we've hinted at this throughout the webinar, but allow me to get a little bit more into detail. For the same reportable change, the change requirements will differ across your licenses. That's true across different agencies, but that's also true across different licenses within the same agency. And believe it or not, the same change can have different change requirements for the same license for the same agency. For example, a 9% change of ownership may require a change notification reporting, whereas an 11% change of ownership may require submission of a change application. Further, change notification reporting could be accepted via email or may require a formal written letter. Now, because this work is time constrained, all that variation is enough to drive someone crazy. And there is no single source of truth to find that information. But that means state licensing professionals must determine 3 points for each and every affected license. First, does the license have a change requirement? If yes, what do I need to do to comply? Do I need to submit a flash notification, submit a change application, amend an initial application, or submit a new initial application? When do I need to comply by? For a company with 100 licenses, state licensing professionals must completely and correctly perform 300 points, meaning 3 points for every one of their 100 licenses. That means this process has 300 points of failure. And that is an understatement of the difficulty of this work. Why? Because the agency information you need to confirm those 300 points is scattered across almost 350 pages for one license. For a company with 100 licenses, The information they need is scattered across 3,500 pages. Go ahead and look at that math on that slide. Now you'll do your best to use Control F to search for keywords within those 3,500 pages. And if you're good, you can reduce the number of pages to only 500 pages. However, we're talking about 500 pages of dry, tedious reading. Reading you must correctly comprehend before the requirement deadline. Now, that makes that process take longer when you can't find the information in those pages. So you check more pages and more pages, but eventually you become convinced the information is not there. Or even more frustrating, the information is sort of there, but it's ambiguous and therefore inconclusive. In this case, you'll need to reach out to the agency to get the information or get clarification on the information. And many agencies are not responsive. But all the while, the clock is still ticking for the deadlines. Now, you may be thinking, if there's so much work to do and so little time to do the work, why don't people complete some of this work ahead of time? That is a good question. However, there are two reasons why you can't do any of this work ahead of time. One, you must determine your change requirements using the most current applications, FAQs, and other documents for each agency. In other words, you can determine your change requirements once, note those requirements, and reference those notes when a reportable change occurs. Two, for many reportable changes, you don't know when the change is coming. You don't know in advance when an officer or a DR is planning to leave. Those are two reasons why you can't do this work ahead of time. And that's another reason why there's too much work to do in too little time. Before we offer some solutions to these problems, I'm going to stop and pass things over to Ryan for another poll question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michelle. All right, everyone. Now that we've reviewed the various deadlines for change requirements and how the information is scattered across multiple sources and difficult to gather, I'd like to ask everybody, have you completed a reportable change requirement late in the last 2 years? I believe some of you may have based on previous survey responses. Again, these deadlines are very strict. Some of them are 60 days before the change occurs. Some are just 30 days after. I think someone noted that a pharmacist in charge can be a 1 day turnaround time on that notification. So this is a very common issue that people face. Perfect. All right, great. Thanks for the participation, everybody. You should see the results on the screen now. It looks like just over 50% of survey responders said they have not, while just under 50% have said they have submitted a change late. Thanks for your engagement there, everybody. Really appreciate it. So next, what I'd like to do is talk about some of the solutions available to solve these problems that we've reviewed today. So as you already knew or now know, a lot of problems pop up when trying to determine the reportable change requirements for all of your licenses. From our conversations with state licensing professionals, they use 3 decision criteria to choose one of 4 common solutions. Criteria 1 is the solution fast. The solution must be fast in order for you to comply with reportable change deadlines. 2 is the solution accurate. Fast and accurate don't normally go together, but with reportable changes, they must. And criteria 3 is the solution cost effective. Regrettably, it's rare to find a solution that meets all 3 criteria. In fact, this is what economists refer to as the unattainable triangle. By that, they mean you can find a solution that meets 2 out of 3 criteria, but you'll struggle to find a solution that meets all 3. And you'll find this phenomenon to be true for most solutions for determining your change requirements. So let's take a look at the 4 solutions. Solution 1 on this list is doing the work yourself. Doing the work yourself is almost always most cost-effective or more cost-effective than outsourcing the work to licensing vendor or law firm. However, most companies sacrifice either speed or accuracy when doing the work themselves. Due to deadlines, accuracy is almost always the victim, not speed. To do this work quickly and accurately, you have to stop everything else you're doing, sometimes for days at a time. And most people just can't do that. So let's take a look at solutions 2 and 3, which involves state licensing vendors or law firms. Once again, these solutions check only 1 or 1.5 of the solution criteria. They are accurate, but not cost effective, and many times not much faster than doing the work yourself. Let me pause for a minute to say this about the cost. You could and should make a comparison of the vendor price to the cost of inaccurately doing the work yourself. If you compare the cost of outsourcing this work to the cost of lost sales revenue due to inaccuracies, then these two options are very, very cost effective. And that's why many people outsource this work to law firms or state licensing vendors. Still, many don't because the cost is just not in their budget. And finally, the fourth option is Lighthouse AI. We purpose-built the Lighthouse AI platform to attain the unattainable triangle. These three criteria were and are our success criteria. Licensing vendors and law firms require expensive, expert labor to complete the work. In contrast, the Lighthouse AI software does the work of an expert labor at the cost of software and at the speed of software. Now, I'm going to hand things over to Tessa Farley, our Lighthouse AI training specialist, who will provide a brief demonstration to show how Lighthouse AI state licensing software solve these problems we've discussed today. Over to you, Tessa.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Let's talk all about how Lighthouse AI processes reportable changes and determines your change requirements, which is only going to help you avoid the consequences of noncompliance. So, really, it all begins in the change assessment questionnaire. This is where the Lighthouse AI software helps users capture the details of the change and determine their requirements. So when we click on a specific reportable change, in this case, designated representative, the software displays only the questions relevant to your selected change, DR, DR supervisor, or officer. A full team of Lighthouse AI researchers built this change assessment questionnaire by reviewing all of the details for over 700 state licenses. That's divided across over 80 agencies, and again, then across all jurisdictions. It's enough to make your head spin. Specifically, they compiled a list of all of the change details that determine the change requirements for those 700 plus licenses. With the use of this questionnaire, the Lighthouse AI software prevents state licensing professionals from having to connect and reconnect with internal stakeholders every time they find a new or previously unknown change detail, which dictates their change requirements. By eliminating all of that back and forth, the software expedites capturing the details of the change, leaving more time to actually comply with the requirement deadlines. So once we capture all of the details of the change, Lighthouse AI helps determine all of the change requirements. After completing the questionnaire, the software uses your answers to determine the reportable change requirements that you must comply with. And this is what is known as a change assessment. The same team that built these questionnaires catalogs every change requirement for every license, every agency, every jurisdiction. Our software pinpoints which change requirements apply by comparing them to the details of your reportable change. The Lighthouse AI Change Assessment automatically lists all the information that you need to determine the two most important parts of every requirement. First, what you need to do, and second, when you need to do it. Because the software automatically determines your reportable change requirements, you no longer need to do the following for all of your licenses. You don't need to locate and assess the change requirement details in all current license applications for active licenses. You don't need to locate and assess requirement details in all of the FAQ documents for all the agencies that you have licenses with. You don't need to locate or assess requirement details in the guidance documents for the agencies you have licenses with. And you don't need to locate and assess the requirement details in all of the statutes and rules for all of the agencies that you have active licenses with. Lighthouse AI automatically does all of that and so much more. Not only does this automation save you time, it eliminates all the mistakes that are commonly associated with completing those steps manually, such as overlooking a change requirement or incorrectly capturing what you must do or when you must do it. Your list of active licenses is always stored in the Lighthouse AI management module. Within this module, users track both their licensing activities as well as the tasks associated with each activity. Activities are all of the major actions that are taken on a license, whether that is obtaining a new license, renewing an existing one, or making changes to it. Each activity is supported by a set of tasks, which again are those individual steps that users complete to move the activity forward. Additionally, your management subscription includes access to the document repository, where you can store and retrieve your as filed applications for reference when a reportable change occurs. Supporting documents like application attachments and any other required materials can also be stored in the repository. With in-app confidentiality controls and our ISO 27001 certification, you can be assured that all of your sensitive information is safeguarded with controls that meet the highest compliance expectations. These are just a few reasons why Lighthouse AI is the only solution for reportable changes that is fast, accurate, and cost effective. Please know that what I showed you today only represents about 5% of our software's capabilities. There really is so much more to Lighthouse AI. In addition to our software, we also offer end-to-end state licensing services. Our licensing experts can submit all of these change applications and flash notifications on your behalf to fulfill your reportable change requirements. Because there's so much more to Lighthouse AI, I highly encourage you to learn more about our software and services by meeting with one of our sales representatives who has both industry and product expertise. They'll work with you to determine all of the problems Lighthouse AI can solve for you and the value of solving those problems. And they'll also explain how easy it is to implement our software so you can solve those problems effortlessly and immediately.
So now we finally made it to the Q&A session. This is where you can ask all of us questions that you have related to change requirements, the software, or any other state licensing um, inquiries you have. So I'm going to open things up. Michelle and Liza, are you available to take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, perfect. Let's see what we have. So Michelle, I'm going to give you this first question if that's okay. Um, Someone had asked, are there other kinds of change requirements that we didn't cover today?
Yeah, actually, there are. So, what we covered today in today's webinar are the five that we considered the most common or important. For facilities, things like notification of license reinstatement or surrender are examples of something that we didn't go over today. And then for pharmacies, things like change in operation hours or temporary closures, things like that would also be something that are necessary to notify the regulatory agencies about. There are other reportable events like theft and loss, as well as anything like a facility attribute change in regards to your business model activities and or products. So those are some examples.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Few questions here. This one's for Liza. Someone had asked, we're expecting a change of ownership in the second half of this year. What requirements should I expect?
Okay, this is highly dependent on a number of details. You'd have to take into consideration the ownership change, whether or not the designated rep or the pharmacist in charge is changing. Will the product still be shipped from the original company's facility or will it be moved to one of your other existing facilities? The good news is that Lighthouse AI software can help with that. We can support you through that. So we'd recommend setting up a meeting with us to help out.
Perfect. Thank you, Liza. Um, I've got a few more here. Michelle, I'm going to throw the next one at you. Um, Someone had asked, are there any tips for getting ahead of change requirements?
Right, so we had that really good section in there where we talk about how hard it is to actually get ahead of requirements. So some good tips that I can pass along to you is get to your licensing state professional as soon as possible so they can have time to prepare. Like we noted in the webinar, time is of the essence, and then there's a lot of work to do and where to go find that information. So earlier, the better. And then also, as we stated, there's a lot of notification deadlines in terms of like between 60 days prior to all the way, like we just noted for PIC, which is 1 day. So get to that person as soon as possible. One example of that is that we worked with a company that purchased a new company, and because their paperwork was delayed because it was all tied up, it couldn't get to the state board on time. And so they had to halt their business for 8 weeks. So that's no sales or shipping for all that time. So get to that state licensing professional as soon as possible.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Um, Received a software related question. Tessa, if you don't mind taking this one.
Not at all.
Some Perfect. Someone had asked, besides change requirements, uh, what other capabilities does the software have?
Sure. Well, Lighthouse AI was purpose-built to assist companies in the pharmaceutical supply chain with all of your state licensing requirements across all 50 states and additional jurisdictions like DC and Puerto Rico. So, beyond change assessments, because that's only a small piece, we also offer, like we mentioned, initial and gap assessments to determine your licensing requirements and identify any gaps that put you at risk of noncompliance. After your assessment, we provide our users with ongoing notifications for changes to rules, regulations, and legislation across all of those same jurisdictions, 50 states and Puerto Rico. Our management module, which we took a brief look at today, we'll look at more tomorrow, that allows you to track and monitor all of your active, pending, expired, surrendered licenses, as well as the activities and tasks related to those licenses, like renewals. And we also offer task delegation, which is pretty cool. So luckily, Ryan, we're going to be actually going over all of this tomorrow in our software demo webinar. So I hope whoever asked, you're able to join us and we can show you around a bit more.
Excellent. Thank you, Tessa.
You're welcome.
Um, there's a good question here, Michelle. I'm going to throw at you if that's okay. Someone had asked, if you happen to miss the 30-day reportable window, what's the best course of action? Do you report it as soon as possible to the board despite missing the 30 days and apologize? Is it best just to get it in even if you're late, or what do you recommend there?
Oh yes, we must notify. So late or not, by an hour, a day, a month, a year, it's best to just come out and go ahead and notify. So either get in touch with us, that'd be great, or on your own time, it would probably be best to go ahead and notify them of that specific change as soon as possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Michelle. Um, there's another software related question that I'll take here. That was an interesting one. Is there a software similar to yours, or does yours help disclose disciplines on time? Um, I don't believe there is, not that I'm familiar with, not that particularly submits disciplines or references actions to disciplinary actions and communicating with the boards. I think a lot of that's still done manually with the boards through email and phones. But that's actually a really interesting concept to tell our product dev team. Tessa, if you want to pass that along to a few folks, that's a good one. I like that. Perfect. Couple more questions here. We have a few more moments. Someone had a really good question about the reportable discipline. Michelle or Liza, is there any difference in a facility or a specific site being disciplined versus the actual entity itself? How does that relate? Is there a relationship there? Or if you don't mind just talking about that in some regard, is more emphasis put on the facility versus the entity or vice versa?
Liza, do you want me to take that
I
one?
can take it and you can
Okay.
add on if there's
Yeah.
anything.
Cool. Let's do that.
I would say it's Typically, they're tied to the facility, but if there's anything that it's really important to look at the actual application or the renewals, what questions are being asked. And certain states have different regulations on how soon you have to report a timeline. Some of them have it really clearly laid out. Some of them just expect it. So we do have some of that information in-house. So obviously you can reach out to us and we can help with that. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Michelle, on that.
No, really spot on. That is my exact answer. So paying attention to specifically how those questions are worded is very important. Um, Typically, in terms of, I guess it would be more facility leaning, more likely because that is the facility holding the license. But again, heavy emphasis on reading the question very carefully, seeing and answering what they are asking for.
Amazing. Thanks for the answer, guys. That's great. I think we have time for one final question, if that's okay. Someone was asking about the order of licenses that you should submit requirements for. Is there any preference to do your home state first non-resident, and then, federal level notifying them? Is there any recommended order to start with? Home states, non-resident, and then federal.
Home state is always the best, federal, home state, and then other after that. Most of the other states are going to require the home state license, so you would need that to start the process in other states.
Great. Good
Definitely.
question, Tim.
Just adding on to that one, there is a change process for DBA. So um, keep our eyes peeled for those rules and regulations and possibly reaching out to other agencies. But again, like Liza noted, we do have that information in-house. So if you need a little help with that, please let us know.
Thank you. All right, I think that's all the questions that we had today. So we've reached the end of the webinar. Just want to thank everybody for attending today and for your interest in Lighthouse AI. As a reminder, this was recorded and we'll be sending out an email of the recording probably tomorrow morning. So look out for that. If you'd like to rewatch or share with any colleagues, please do. If you have any additional questions that you didn't ask today, feel free to submit them to us via email or through our website. Those are up on the screen now. LighthouseAI.com is our website, of course, and hello@lighthouseai.com is our general inbox. Please feel free to send questions there. Thank you all so much for attending today. Hope to see you on future webinars and have a great day.